Hello, and welcome to Global Scalpels, a podcast dedicated to the 5 billion people worldwide who lack access to safe and affordable surgery.
I'm Rihanna.
And I'm Taylor.
And together we're Global Scalpels. We have two wonderful speakers with us today representing the involvement and advocacy of medical trainees in global surgery, with a message that trainees and students don't need to wait until they're finished training to be a valuable member of the team. Our first guest today graduated as a Doctor of Medicine from the Faculty de Medicine et de Pharmacie de Casablanca, Morocco in 2018, and then completed a master's in international health and tropical medicine at the University of Oxford. When she was a medical student, she co-founded and chaired for 2 years the International Student Surgical Network, also known as InciSioN. She also co-founded and chaired the local chapter of the International Federation of Medical Students Associations in Casablanca. Now she's working as a research assistant for the Surge Africa project at the University of Oxford and chairing the board of trustees of InciSioN. She's passionate about health advocacy, gender equity, and equal access to opportunities. So we would first like to welcome Dr. Zineb Bentounsi. Thanks for being with us today.
Thank you, Rihanna. It's a pleasure.
And our second guest today is a graduating medical student at Harvard Medical School and a soon-to-be OBGYN resident in Boston at the Brigham Women's Hospital and Massachusetts General Hospital combined program. As a first-year medical student, she founded the Global Surgery Student Alliance, or GSSA, a national nonprofit organization that now has chapters in over 60 U.S. medical schools. She has also had the joy of working with trainees from around the world through GSSA's role as the U.S. National Working Group of InciSioN with Zineb. In addition, she also implemented a global health curriculum for Harvard medical students to encourage future physicians to view their patients in a broader context and to consider global health as a valuable part of their future careers. Throughout her career, she plans to advocate for the voice of OBGYNs in global surgery and the surgical needs of women around the globe, while continuing to build on her passion for medical education and supporting the future of global surgery workforce. So with that great introduction, we'd like to welcome our second amazing guest, which is soon to be Dr. Parisa Fallah.
Thank you guys so much for having me.
Great to have these two wonderful trainees here with us today to talk with us. And you both have very different backgrounds and experiences and things to offer us and our listeners. And so we'd just like to first start off with asking you to tell us a little bit about what brought you both to global surgery in your respective fields.
So actually, it all started at International Federation of Medical Students Associations meeting in March 2015. I went there, and it was in Turkey, and I met Izzy Mark, who was very passionate about global surgery and was leading a group of medical students within the federation. They called themselves the Global Surgery Group. So they needed extra volunteers to help raising awareness for the topic during the meeting. So I was eager, to meet new people, discover new things. It was one of my first trips abroad. So I just signed up, and after a week volunteering with them, I really liked I really liked what I was doing, and I wanted to stay involved. And it all began like that, really. 2015, it was before even the WHO passed the resolution. So it was all new and exciting, and this hype thing everybody was talking about. So I was feeling lucky to be involved.
And I think my path was a little bit different, because I think my path started a little bit more with becoming interested in just surgery. When I was in undergrad, I had the opportunity to spend a month at MD Anderson Cancer Center in the thoracic surgery department. And I got to scrub in on surgeries and spend a lot of time with surgical providers. And I was like, wow, this is so cool. But at the same time, there was a surgeon who was visiting from India, and he was learning new advanced techniques in esophagectomy procedures so that he could teach these techniques to his colleagues back home. And I thought, wow, this is so innovative and different from what I've always thought about global health and specifically surgical care being done in mission trips where people just go in and do a bunch of surgeries and leave, which has never really been a very sustainable approach to this kind of work. And so that's where my interest got kind of piqued. And so from there, I just started reading as many papers as I could find. And this was also actually before the Lancet Commission on Global Surgery and all this. So there wasn't that much out there. So I contacted the people who wrote these papers, and I said, what is global surgery? How can I get involved? And eventually got very lucky. I spoke to a neurosurgeon who was in Toronto who offered to let me come there and do 9 weeks of research with him. And so I wrote my undergraduate thesis on what makes it so hard for surgeons to become actively involved in sustainable capacity building global surgery work. And so that's kind of where everything started for me. And it was when I came to medical school that I decided I wanted to act upon the results of the research that I had done and figure out if we could fix the problem starting as early as students and residents to help them get involved in the field in what are now considered some of the more capacity building and partnership ways.
Really great. And I guess you guys have had both very different paths to getting into global surgery, but the one thing that's common is it's the people that bring you to the field, whether that's people you're inspired by around you or just people that you're seeing doing some of this work. And both of you have then gone on to lead these student organizations. For our listeners who may not be familiar with either GSSA or InciSioN, would you mind telling us a bit more about these organizations?
So InciSioN stands for the International Student Surgical Network. It's a non-profit organization made of medical students and residents or surgical trainees. And they really gather together to advocate about global surgery, do research about the topic, educate other medical students, but also the general public on the need for surgical care. I guess now it's a big network. When it started, it was just a dozen of students, but now we have 48 national chapters and a core surgical team, international team.
And actually, it's really awesome that I get to be on this podcast with Zineb, because that's also like how a lot of this started for GSSA. So back when I was at the beginning of medical school, basically a small group of students, actually a very similar story, came together and wanted to figure out how we could help our own colleagues learn more about the field of global surgery. And so we hosted this large conference, and from there decided we need to really formalize our efforts and be more organized in getting out to students. And so that's how GSSA was born. It's the Global Surgery Student Alliance, but actually really is meant for students as early as their undergraduate years, through medical school, and all the way up through residency, training, and junior doctors. And the very funny thing is when I first started GSSA, I didn't really know what the scope of the organization was going to be. And eventually, through online searching, was able to find InciSioN, who had also just started around that time, and realized they didn't have a US national working group. And so that's what GSSA decided to become, was to serve students in the United States who were having challenges figuring out where to find mentors and opportunities and just to learn more about the field and to move away from this idea of like mission-based work and to understand that as students and trainees, we can contribute to global surgery in many ways other than through clinical work, which is what it was kind of always thought to be. And so we've been working on a number of projects in the realms of advocacy, education, and research, with the goal of students engaging on Twitter, students building global surgery curriculum, doing national research projects and things like that. And we now have chapters at over 60 US medical schools, as Taylor mentioned. And so it's continuing to grow on a daily basis. And one of the lovely things is that while we're very focused on helping support our students here in the US, because we're connected to InciSioN, we've been able to learn more from our colleagues around the world and also relay that learning back to our students who are in our chapters at our institution. So it's been really, really an exciting effort and crazy to see how much things can grow so quickly amongst a young population.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I still remember receiving this email from that girl from Harvard, who wanted to connect. And I'm glad it all worked out okay, and more than okay, actually. It's been great.
I think definitely more than okay. You guys have done incredible work. And something that I love what you guys are saying is that these aren't necessarily calculated things. I think when we're first starting as trainees, we think like, look at these people, like big names in the field and just think that they had this vision forever and that they were always going to do this or something. But the fact of the matter is like you come to different opportunities and you see there's a hole there. Or Zineb was like, I just am in Turkey and like, what is this cool thing? Like, I want to get involved, right? Or Parisa saying like, oh, I don't really know that much about this. I want to learn more. Or, hey, I see that there's not something for students yet. Like, let's create something, right? So it's not necessarily that you have to have this big grand vision to create this international student network when you first start. It can be something very simple of, hey, I'm a trainee. I want to get involved. I want to help. So like, I see a hole here. Let me jump on it, and who knows where it could lead you. You might be leading an international organization or having 60 plus chapters across the United States. So really exciting, and can show the power that can happen from a small vision that can grow and grow and grow as you feel a need. Zineb, we wanted to ask you a couple of specific questions because despite our best efforts, as you kind of mentioned, global surgery can be inequitable at times. It can be skewed in terms of language, which I think you've actually published an article on this, so that English isn't the only language that should be used for global surgery. Presence of HIC people being there, skewed in forms of gender. So how did you navigate this being a co-chair from an LMIC, and what advice would you give to other LMIC students who want to get involved with this type of initiatives or even create their own and start them themselves?
Thank you, Taylor. It's a really important question. And I think when I started, as you said, I was this eager young medical student full of dreams. I didn't think it through. I didn't know what I was up to, or how difficult it would be. So I guess I just started, and the difficulties appeared later along the way. I was like, oh, okay, well, there's this conference in the US, but it's going to be very difficult to get a US visa. So I don't think difficult and expensive. So unfortunately, I don't think I can do that. Or, oh, I want to go here, but I cannot afford it. Or sometimes there are just stupid problems, like internet is too slow and it cuts during a very important Skype meeting. Yeah, no, but
It's true.
small things that you don't think about. So I was lucky to be stubborn and to receive help along the way. For example, when I was co-chairing, my co-chair was Dominique, who was based in Belgium at the time. He really was key in helping me with practical things as visa, invitation letters, and a way to process a payment that needed to be done. And I couldn't process from Morocco because of a strict, banking laws and things like that. And I think it was a good thing that we were bringing both perspectives within our duo. He was from Europe, I was from Africa, and together we were able to create a platform that was open to everyone wherever they lived, because he would bring the perspective of somebody from the global north, and I would know best what it meant to be a medical student from the global south. So we learned and exchanged together. And my advice for students in LMICs would be just do something. You want to do it. Don't let anyone tell you what you can do, what you cannot do. Help will come along the way.
Just be Nike, huh? Just do it.
Absolutely.
If you don't mind, if I could just follow up really quickly on that. How did you get connected with Dominique in the first place? And how did that relationship kind of cultivate and move forward?
So I met Dominique at a conference. So I mentioned I had met Izzy Mark, who is from the UK. So she was co-hosting a conference in London, and she invited me because we stayed connected. And she was also it was an open conference. So Dominique had heard of the conference and came along. So we both met in London and became friends almost instantly. We were both eager to do something in global surgery. We were both junior at the time. So we started off with the mentoring of Isabel Mark in the beginning. Afterwards, it's just the ball kept rolling.
That's great. And I love the fact that your initiative had both perspectives, because we wouldn't even think about things like banking and payment being an issue. I think internet's probably something that people would appreciate, but it's all of these other barriers that if you don't know about them, you can't take them into account.
Yeah, absolutely.
Global surgery can be inequitable in other ways as well. And oftentimes that's skewed in terms of language, the presence of high-income country people, and also gender. I know we spoke about that already, but actually the fact is that a lot of the research that's being published, a lot of the conferences are all in English. And we know you've published previously on this before, but how do you navigate these language barriers and get LMIC students and trainees from countries where English isn't the main language to get involved with some of these initiatives?
Yeah, that's tricky. So English is not my first language. It's not even my second language. It's not my third language.
Wow.
So I guess the English is everywhere now. So people kind of know a little bit of it. So I think what we must encourage is translation wherever possible. If journals can translate at least the abstract into, like, let's say the 5 main languages, and also I would say, like, sometimes I find it difficult even now that some articles just speak very complicated English while they can say the same things with more basic words, so I think it's all nice to want to be very academic and use this language, but it's also important to know that if you want to spread the message, you need to do it simply. I don't know what's the solution really. What I'm trying to do is to stay connected with the francophone global surgery community, for example, holding talk and kind of doing the bridge, acting as a bridge between the English word and the francophone world, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, in francophone sub-Saharan Africa. But I think we need a more systematic effort.
Definitely agree. Yeah, I mean, it's hard because, as you said, English is the unifying language that, as you said, is everywhere now. So by speaking that and writing in that, you are also increasing the number of people that you can connect with. But at the same time, then you also exclude people. So I think that that's a really good point of maybe trying to figure out how to have at least the abstract be put into some other languages that might be more accessible to people who don't necessarily speak English. These are really important considerations. And also just making it a little bit simpler in English. As you said, we can just think about that when we're talking about the messages that we want to deliver. Parisa, we wanted to also follow up with you a little bit about the concept of GSSA and the creation. Could you tell us a little bit more about kind of the nuts and bolts of what it takes to create, take a concept like GSSA and actually create the physical organization and how you went about doing that?
Yeah, so I think, and Zineb can speak to this too, because anytime you try to organize something that's happening organically, it's a little bit of a struggle. I think, a lot of it, like I said, actually happened very organically. It was, let's start out with a conference, because we don't have any global surgery conferences out there that students can attend. Students don't really know what global surgery as a concept even is. So maybe we need to start at the basics. And so when we first hosted the Boston Global Surgery Symposium back at the beginning of 2017, our goal was to bring in speakers who could really talk about the foundational aspects of the field. And one of the most important things was actually accessibility, because we knew that medical students don't have a lot of money and wouldn't be able to travel to this conference, and maybe wouldn't be quite interested enough to make that jump. And so we actually live streamed everything. We have recordings of it still available for people. And the goal there was just to get that spark, to really get people interested in the field. And I think that's kind of where you have to start, is you have to understand who's your audience and who are the people around you who might have this interest, and how can you best serve them. And some of the very simple things we did from the beginning is, first connecting with InciSioN to understand what the scope of GSSA would be, coming up with the logo, creating a website, all these things to help make sure it was visible. But then we just relied on our networks. So I had friends who were in medical schools all across the country. My other classmates also did. So when you compound all of that together, you actually have a lot of people that you can reach out to. And so we emailed everyone to let them know about the conference, but then also that we were creating this organization. We didn't know exactly what it was going to look like. And they could reach out to us anytime if they had questions or wanted to take things a little bit further. And I don't know if I started out thinking we were going to have chapters everywhere, but that's essentially what happened, because students wanted to run these initiatives on their own at their schools. And everyone, I think, who goes to medical school wants in some way to be a leader. And I think it's important to acknowledge that and give everyone the space to do that in this field, and understanding that every person brings something unique, and people who are at their own medical schools better understand the resources that are available to them. And so we created a chapter development toolkit, and that's how things kind of started. And over time, we just did a lot of brainstorming. What's the next project we should do? I think students are really interested in understanding how to do clinical rotations abroad, but how to do that thoughtfully and respectfully. And so we created a toolkit for that. Now we've gone on to do things like hosting webinars and ensuring that local chapters could host smaller conferences at their schools, hosting hackathons and things like that. Meanwhile, our role at the national level has always been to help support the students in their initiatives and to help highlight the work that's being done around the country. Because one of the challenges too within the field of global surgery here specifically in the United States, is that it seems like there's only a couple of big centers for global surgery and nothing else happening everywhere else. And that's not true. And so we want to ensure that the work that's being done everywhere is being highlighted. And I think some of the challenges that you experience along the way is that you really have to inspire people. And while at first that's very easy to do, it then becomes a matter of maintaining that motivation and that desire to continue working on these efforts. And then the other big part of it to really help make this a reality was convincing faculty members that it was important. So some faculty members would say, oh yes, we really need to engage the next generation. But a lot of them, it was hard to convince them that what we were doing was more than just a student interest group. We were really trying to make an impact on the field. And so it took a lot of small presentations to groups of faculty, trying to get to conferences to share about our efforts, and like really understanding that yes, we are a group of students. We haven't quite made it to, becoming full-fledged physicians yet, but we still have a lot to contribute and we want to share why. So those are kind of some of the components of all that went into it. It's really hard to capture it all in a short time span, and I'm sure Zineb will tell you the same thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And these organizations, I guess, don't build up over 60-second chats. So I'm sure there's a lot of hard work behind the scenes that we're not quite appreciating.
But I think you gave a very rich description of it, Parisa.
Zineb is always like the best supporter. What a best friend.
Well, that's how you inspire people. You just said it was important to inspire people.
Zineb is one of the most inspiring speakers I know, just so you know. I've seen her speak at many conferences before, and everyone walks away going, oh, I'm ready to change the world.
You're too kind, Parisa.
It's so great to see that both you guys have such a good working relationship through your organizations. Parisa, you mentioned specifically something that came up was geography being a big challenge. So how you connect people who are interested and people who are actually doing work. So how do you bring those two together as one challenge? How did you tackle that? And also, what other challenges did you experience in trying to create this organization?
Yeah, I think it's really tough. I think what you'll see from a lot of GSSA's work is that some of the projects have really come out of the Northeast, and that's because we started here in Boston. We were able to easily connect with schools that were nearby, who could drive in, who we could actually meet in person. And we very quickly found that some of the people who were most motivated and excited to be a part of these global surgery efforts were the ones who were able to meet all these other different students and faculty in settings like conferences and other opportunities. So, Zineb and I, for example, met over Skype and continue to maintain that friendship. But then things even go to another level when we were able to meet in person for the first time. And I think there's something very special about those relationships, which is very sad during this pandemic. We don't get to benefit from that. And so we tried to create as many opportunities as we could for people to meet in person, recognizing that it's not possible for everyone. So our national conference has moved to different locations every single year. So starting in Boston and then moving to Houston, Texas, back to the East Coast, but then going all the way to the West Coast in Utah, which unfortunately couldn't happen in person because of the pandemic. But the idea behind it was to help create these pockets of opportunity for trainees in different parts of the country to get involved. And I think one of the challenges of keeping people motivated is helping present to students and trainees like why their role is so important, and that this network that they're building is actually incredibly valuable. So some of my best friends have come from meeting people over Skype and WhatsApp and not having ever met in person, and realizing the value in that, 10, 15 years down the line when we are faculty members and we have a little bit more say in what happens within this field, that like having those relationships is kind of, it's just very special and not something that you see in many fields out there. And so I think trying to like really get that concept to students who maybe haven't learned as much about these organizations yet is one of the biggest challenges. But then once we're able to, I think, create that spark and they're able to meet students as individuals, it's been able to blossom.
And I think that's such an important thing is, as you're saying, that sometimes those relationships come from seemingly nothing, right? I remember actually the first time I met Zineb as well was when we were all going to Bethune Roundtable. And so we had been talking, and something we haven't mentioned here yet is like Twitter. Like I remember us walking around Bethune Roundtable and being like, oh yeah, it's so-and-so. Like I've never met this person. I've just talked to them on Twitter, you know what I mean? Or tweeted at them, but I know who they are. I know their values. We've talked, we've become friends. friends. Same thing with Zineb. We had talked over, Instagram or Twitter or something. And so we knew each other and who each other were. And then when we saw each other, I just like gave her a big hug, and it was so exciting to meet in person, right? So these relationships can start from seemingly small things. We're going to move to the next part. We wanted to ask one more question to Parisa about ensuring that we kind of already talked about this with Zineb a little bit with incorporating LMICs and getting them involved, but how did you do that in your organization? Obviously, GSSA is a component of InciSioN, but how did you incorporate the voice of LMICs and try and avoid maybe the risk of being just a US-centric organization?
I think that's a really important thing that we come up against sometimes. When trying to explain that we're the U.S. National Working Group and our efforts are really meant to help U.S. students. And the reason we try to really focus on this is because we really want to be careful as a high-income country to not lead global surgery efforts in a world where those efforts really should be led by our colleagues in LMICs. And I think it's really important that we do that to serve as an example to the younger students who are just finding out about the field of global surgery, but also global health in general, to understand that while the US has a majority of these resources available, a lot of the conferences are hosted here, how can we be able to share those resources with our colleagues in LMICs without dominating the discussion in any way? And I think it's a tricky balance. I think it's something that we've been kind of continuing to titrate over time, and it's been really wonderful working with InciSioN to help figure out like how can we be most helpful in those settings without overpowering the voices of our colleagues. And so part of that balance is, as the U.S. National Working Group, we want to ensure that our faculty here are aware of us and can help direct students from their institutions to our efforts. But then at the same time, when we have a conference, when we have a webinar, when we have anything that's recorded, how can we make it most accessible for our colleagues in LMICs? How can we help our colleagues get opportunities to speak at the conferences here? I remember like for Bethune Roundtable, like me, Zineb, and Godfrey, one of our dear friends, got to speak together. And it was like really important to know that we shouldn't just be highlighting student voices that are in the US and Canada. We should really be bringing voices from other parts of the world to make that possible for everyone. So I think it's this very delicate balance, and Zineb can comment on this even more, of we want to share our resources, but also not overpower the discussion so that our LMIC colleagues are truly the ones who are leading these efforts, because they're the ones who know firsthand like how global surgery should really be practiced.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, for saying it so eloquently. I think as a field, global surgery is still struggling to get that right balance. Although I must say, if I compare to other global health fields, I am proud of global surgery because I think we are ahead in offering, in being more equitable. But it's true that it's like, unfortunately, quote unquote, normal. When the imbalance is so big that things tend towards the most powerful or the most resourceful. So it really needs a conscious effort to kind of rebalance the situation and being mindful of, okay, well, I could take this opportunity, but I could also share it to other people. Maybe I've had enough opportunities, this person could benefit more, and things like that. And you can think about it individually, but you can also, and it's more important to think about it when you are leading an organization and how your organization sets into this world. And as Parisa said, you have no idea how powerful it is to set the good example. So if your organization is doing the right thing, you're inspiring others to start doing the right thing, and then it all grows from there. And just to also echo the importance of streaming conferences, which might be the one benefit of this pandemic. When Parisa organized the conference in Boston in 2017, she streamed it, and it was amazing because all over the world we had people joining in and hearing these speakers that we read their papers, etc., but we have never the opportunity to hear them. So things like that really make a difference.
Absolutely. And a lot of this comes down to values, and it sounds like as long as the organizations have these values in mind, that we can try and work towards creating solutions to make sure that there is this balance between the HICs and the LMICs in the conversation about global surgery. I really like the point that kind of came up for both of you as well, is the fact that we are setting an example, or rather you guys with your organizations are setting an example, and that although depending on what stage you are at your career, whether you're a medical student or a junior trainee, you're still setting an example for people coming behind you up that ladder. So there is an element of mentorship and inspiring those values in others at every stage of your career, which is great to see in both of you guys. I think it's amazing that both of you guys did all of this while still being full-time students. And I think that's something that I can't stress enough. I mean, the amount of work that a medical student has to then set up an international or a national organization is just so impressive. How did you guys balance this?
I don't really know. It was difficult. It was difficult, and at times, I needed, for example, to step back a little bit when I had exams, and then my colleagues would step in, and similarly, when they needed to step back, I would step in, etc. We were lucky to have different schedules. And one important thing when you work across organizations and across countries is that the schedules are different. So, for example, Christmas period is a downtime for European countries. It wasn't for me at the time. And then my exams were in January, where Dominique's exams were in April, things like that. But also, I think what I found was that being busy obliged me to schedule things and to organize things. And for example, prioritize, being like, okay, I have 2 hours, I have to study. So I will study efficiently for these 2 hours, because I cannot study for 4 hours, and I have to make the most of these 2 hours. Also, InciSioN was also part of my fun. Although it was work, it was not medical school, so it was also refreshing. I think it helped me with not burning out at medical school.
I have to say it's almost the exact same thing that Zineb is mentioning. I think the biggest one that she mentioned about it ends up actually bringing you joy to shift your focus for some periods of time to this work. I really feel like it's what kept me kind of motivated and inspired. And when we had little victories, it was kind of like, you know, this really exciting thing, and kind of gave you that boost of energy when you had to go into the hospital the next day. I do think that the busier you get, the better you become at managing your schedule. So right now, where I'm actually not very busy, I've done a very poor job of managing my schedule, as I have a lot more time than I'm used to having. And so I actually think that when you add things to your plate that are meaningful to you and that bring you joy, you actually, maybe you're busier like on the whole, but you actually feel a little bit more refreshed at the end of the day because you're able to accomplish so much. And I think like a big piece of advice to students and trainees is never sign up for something that doesn't bring you joy or that you don't feel is important work, because all it's going to do is add to your burnout. You want something that's going to help relieve that for you. And I really do feel like, you know, there were a lot of challenges with managing everything with GSSA, but I think relying on really wonderful teammates is one of the most important things. At the end of the day, you cannot do everything by yourself. And I think there were periods of time where I tried to take on more than maybe I needed to. And as you learn to really trust those around you and to also really divide up work and understand that other people are equally motivated and excited and can really like contribute, then you can really work as a cohesive team. And I think having different schedules helps with that. But I think one of the best parts has been watching different members of the GSSA national team now be able to do so many things without even like really without any inspiration from anyone else, just all coming from themselves. And I think it's important to recognize that you are not in this alone. You don't always have to be the leader. And there are times where you can step back and let someone else have that spotlight. And that also gives you breathing space to then come back refreshed again to contribute more.
Definitely. I think that is an important thing of picking up things that you love and that you're passionate about, that it doesn't feel like work, right? I think often in medicine, Rihanna and actually were actually talking about this earlier today, that, you know, we get excited about things. And so we just start picking up all these things, and you say, kind of have this yes man mentality of you just say yes to everything, but then you end up not actually doing anything particularly well, or you feel burnt out because you've taken on so much, right? Maybe it's because you want a title of a position, a president of something, or maybe it's because you want one more research project on your CV or something. But when you truly weed those out and choose something that's refreshing and that you love and that you're passionate about, yeah, it might be eating into your Friday night a little bit or something like that. But you, as you said, at the end of the day, you feel refreshed, even though you may have actually worked more because you're truly in love with that aspect of your life, right? I think that's really great.
Yeah. And if I can add, Tyler, to what Parisa said about teamwork,
Of course.
It is absolutely important, and also it brings a social element to the work of, you know, InciSioN or GSSA, is also doing that stuff with other people that are like you and that you share values with. So and this interaction and human contact is also, very good in balancing your mental health and your emotions, and just getting to share the same burden that medical school is all around the world is was really valuable.
Definitely. Yeah, I mean, you could count us all going to Bethune or these other conferences as work, right? Because you're going to present a paper or doing something. But those are some of my fondest memories of med school is, showing up to Bethune or to the first GSSA conference in Boston that I went to, right? Like those are highlights of me for medical school that were fun, refreshing, and exciting, even though they were quote unquote technically work because they were professional in nature but they become that connection, as you were saying, Zineb, and those relationships. So our next question that we'd like to talk about is exactly kind of a follow-up on this is like, what skills have you both learned in doing these organizations and creating them? And what skills do you want to take going forward from those experiences?
Well, I think we touched a little bit on that, and the ability to teamwork, the ability to manage your time, to schedule, to share tasks with colleagues. I think these things will be variable on the wards and in the OR, talking about surgery.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think just this concept of really like managing your time and understanding what your priorities are, and that's something that doesn't come right away. But when you get put into these situations where you are so busy, it kind of forces you to then like confront like what's most important in life and how am I going to prioritize those things throughout the day. And sometimes that means sitting down. I've even written down lists before if I have too many things going on, just saying like, okay, these are the top 5 things that I can feasibly accomplish today, and like this is why they're important to get done now. And I think, as Zineb mentioned, these are skills that you definitely take with you into the operating room, into intern year, when you have long checklists of orders and phone calls to make. So I think they apply.
Absolutely. I think list making is one of the things that I'm a big fan of. Our next question is something that I think will probably be hard for you to answer, not because it's a difficult question, but because there are probably so many things you could name. But for both of you, what has been your proudest moment in your organization and why?
Difficult indeed. Well, I think for me, the proudest would be the first symposium that InciSioN hosted. It was called IGSS. It happened in May 2018 in Belgium. For the first time, I saw the product of my work in real life, because before that it has been on emails, on internet, or a couple of conferences where I will go alone or with just one person to represent InciSioN, but I hadn't seen InciSioN in real life. What was it? So in that symposium, a lot of people came, and we made sure to bring scholars from LMICs. We brought 12 medical students and surgical and anesthesia trainees. We raised funds so that we could bring them for free, and it was great to experience, to see these very talented, very inspiring people having this opportunity. And I was looking around and being like, I must be dreaming. This is something that was in my head, but how come it's true? And I at that time, it was around the time that I was making the decision to step back, whether I should step back or not, or have one more term as a co-chair. And after this symposium, I was confident that there were so many people who could take my position, and I was confident I could step back. I was finishing medical school at that time, and my heart was so warm seeing that so many potential leaders are blossoming.
I know this is a tough question, but I think I'll reflect on a very recent moment that I had. Actually, Zineb and I both talked together a lot about our decisions to kind of slowly transition away from our leadership roles, which is very, very funny. We've talked about a lot of this. I think my proudest moment actually was, I definitely love when we have our symposium every year, but I think the proudest moment, we had a webinar recently, and it was, how to get involved in global surgery, learn a little bit more about GSSA for the students who are incoming medical students here in the US. And I was sitting there and everyone was asking all these questions that maybe 2 or 3 years ago, I would be the sole person answering. Oh, what is GSSA? How does it work? What's global surgery? Why should students get involved? And I just got to sit there and listen to all these wonderful new leaders in the GSSA organization answer all these questions so beautifully, and with this like really thorough understanding of like what GSSA was like meant to accomplish and like what they plan to do moving forward. And I think that moment, kind of like Zineb said, when you realize like, oh, I'm not needed here anymore. And I, while that's like also a very challenging like emotion to deal with sometimes, I think it was also kind of this beautiful moment of what I had wanted to truly accomplish in inspiring other people has happened. And like I can now step back and watch all of these amazing new leaders like really go out and just make this organization, but also really just make the field of global surgery better. And so I think very similar in reflecting
Yeah,
moments for us.
it's funny, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
I mean, these are just such special moments, right? As you said, like when you started it, it was maybe you, and now you've trained up the next generation, just like someone taught you, as you said, the neurosurgeon gave you a chance, or Zineb, you got a chance here or there, or to come to Oxford and do a master's or something, and someone else gave you the opportunity to learn, and now you guys are passing that along to the next generation who are coming behind you, and that's what it's all about. And that's just great, this mentorship. And you both are amazing leaders and inspiring individuals to your followers who are coming up, and that's just great. Something that is also common to both of you that we haven't really touched on, we've talked a lot about, you know, this dichotomy between HICs and LMICs. We've talked about, you know, English, but one thing that we haven't really talked about is the gender equity, and within the world of global surgery. And obviously, as both being women, as in the leadership roles and running these organizations, what have been some of your personal experiences in this, and how can we better advocate for women when we're working in global surgery?
Thanks, Taylor. I think every woman must have a personal experience of this, but mine was, I remember this moment like very, very clearly. I was a third year medical school, which in Morocco is the first clinical year. And first time, or you know, a couple of first times in the OR, it was just, oh wow, exciting and a bit scary and all this. And I was watching cholecystectomy, and I asked the question, nobody answered, so I thought they didn't hear me, so I asked the question louder. And then the professor, who was like a gray-haired man, looked at me and said, "Why do you want to know?" And I didn't know what to answer really. I was a bit shocked, and he said, "You think you can be a surgeon?" And you know, it was just aggressive and coming from nowhere. I just shut up and didn't ask any more questions. But reflecting on it, I mean, obviously I brushed it off quickly afterwards, but I think the addition of these small moments, just the skepticism from others, brought a bit of self-doubt into me. And I was like, yeah, I would love to be a surgeon, but maybe it's not for me. Maybe, I don't know, maybe it's not, compatible with the woman's life, especially if I want to have a family, etc., etc. And it took a long time, and me meeting other people from other cultures and seeing some amazing Moroccan neurosurgeons, to be like, okay, maybe I can do it. And it's such a waste that I had to go through all this self-doubt. And I wonder if there are colleagues who just abandoned after the first or the 100 skeptical or aggressive comments. So I think it's a loss of potential. So I feel passionate about it, and I think we should help women believe that they are able to do it, because there is no reason they are not able to.
I have to say that some of the most effective leaders in global surgery are women, and they're not always given the spotlight, but when they are, have been able to make such an amazing impact. And I say this both from the perspective of those who are in these student organizations that we're running, but also like when I go to the American College of Surgeons Clinical Congress or other like Bethune Roundtable and stuff, we see examples of these incredible women who have been so effective in their work. And I think that really speaks to why it's so important to encourage the next generation of young women to know that they also are and can be and will be effective leaders within this field. And I think I come at this also from a little bit of a different perspective now that I'm applying into OBGYN. because one of the challenges that I feel like I've often faced is, you know, within the field of global surgery, OBGYN is supposed to be a big part of it, but isn't always like given that acknowledgement of the value that we bring to this field. And it's hard to say where that's coming from. And in part, it might be from the fact that OBGYNs aren't always respected as being a surgical specialty, and that the treatment of women historically has not been respected within the profession of medicine. And so I think throughout my career, this is actually one of the things I'm very much hoping to tackle, is this idea that caring for women is very important, and that a field that is mostly dominated by women, so I think 80% of OBGYNs are women, is still an important field that has a lot of contributions to make to global surgery. And that as an OBGYN, I'll have the opportunity not only to advocate for future women leaders in the field, but also for female patients around the world who could really benefit from the different types of surgical care that OBGYNs can offer. And so coming from like a slightly different perspective, but I think still falls within this realm of how we view women, both within our profession, within surgery, but also as being valuable patients around the world.
I really like how you guys both had slightly different perspectives, but we're saying very much the same thing. And I think there are probably a lot of people out there who can agree that certain formative experiences, so your first experience in the OR, or seeing global surgery on a global scale, not seeing OBGYNs getting the recognition that they rightfully need, can be so instrumental in either spurring you to do more about it or actually completely pushing you against the career. So it just goes to show the importance of being aware of these words and making sure that you're not saying the wrong thing at the wrong time with the wrong impacts. We're going to move on to our next question now, if that's all right. And that's just about being a medical student in global surgery. And one of the questions that people always talk about is that medical students, they can't operate, they're still learning. So how can they get involved in global surgery? And specifically not just get involved, but actually make an impact?
I think what's nice about global surgery is that you don't need to be a surgeon to be part of the movement. First of all, as Parisa said, it's so many fields. You have surgery, strictly speaking, but you also have OBGYN, you have anesthesia, you have global health, public health specialists. And as a student, I don't think your clinical skills are what you can offer the best. I think what you can offer is advocacy.
That's actually one of the biggest points that we try to emphasize to our students that are here in the US, because I think in the past there's been this misconception that if you're a student who's interested in global health or global surgery, you have to get on a plane and spend a month in another country and provide some form of clinical care in order to be, doing something useful or meaningful in the field. And we're really trying to say that that's not the case. And as Zineb was mentioning, there's advocacy. So literally being on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, talking about this, going to conferences, submitting abstracts about global surgery in places where it hasn't been heard about, engaging in research projects. Students can always be very helpful in that context. There's always global surgery mentors out there who are happy to help you with your own projects, but also that need help with their projects as well. There's opportunities for you to work on research with other medical students in other countries to learn more about that bilateral exchange of information and knowledge. And then from an education standpoint, always encouraging students to just learn more. Like, there's nothing wrong with spending your time reading more papers, learning more about the field, attending conferences, webinars, whatever it may be. Those are ways in which you can start to get involved, learn more, meet mentors, and build relationships that will help follow you throughout your time as you gain those clinical skills and get an even better understanding of what it means to be a part of a surgical system.
Thank you, Parisa. Well, I think you said it all, really. The real power of medical students is not the clinical skills, it's everything else. Everything that surgical trainees don't have the time to do or are not inspired to do. And the enthusiasm, also the happiness and curiosity and enthusiasm of youth is also really important, I think.
Yes.
Definitely. Yeah. So, I mean, as you said, there's a lot of different ways that students can get plugged in, whether that's through advocacy or research, or there's many different avenues, and we definitely have a lot to contribute to this field. To a question to both of you is, if I am a student not currently involved in global surgery and I'm stumbling along this podcast and I'm interested in now getting involved, where would you recommend that I start, and any specific resources that you think would be good for me to look into?
The interesting bit. So, if you're a student, wherever you are in the world, you can log in and check the Facebook page, the Twitter account of InciSioN. There is some, educational material there, but also just to get a sense of who's there, who's doing what is it all about. You can also have like a look at a couple of videos that are on the InciSioN YouTube channel, and quickly you will find a way to plug in, I'm sure. But if you're in the US, then Parisa will tell you what to do.
Well, if you're in the US, you should still go to the InciSioN website, and you should still go to the InciSioN Facebook and Twitter, because you don't want to forget about the rest of the world. Yeah, I recommend going to the GSSA website. It's globalsurgerystudents.org. And there we have really tried to organize all the different resources I would have listed out for you on this podcast, but we'll kind of spare everyone the long list. But we have things like recorded lectures and webinars. We have a new curriculum that came out. We actually have like just a list of different faculty at different schools who do global surgery work, the different conferences you can attend, and there's kind of more that's popping up. And we actually collaborated with InciSioN, who distributed a database that we created, where you can literally look up research projects, mentors, and whatever it may be that you're looking for. So definitely feel free to check that out. I think joining all the Facebook pages and all the Twitters and everything you possibly can is so important, because you want to stay plugged into the entire community for sure.
Absolutely. And I just think it's so interesting how many people meet virtually online and work with people for so long before actually meeting in person. And I think that just goes to show how international and how connected everyone is in this sphere. You guys have both done so much throughout your medical school and now throughout your short time after graduation. But looking back now, what advice would you have given yourself 5 years ago?
Looking back, I would tell my younger self to enjoy life a little bit more. I mean, it's all good to be, ambitious and looking forward to the future and your career, etc. But sometimes just enjoying the little moments in the present. So it's so valuable, because you will never be a student again. Yeah, things like that. Enjoy your life.
I'm laughing so hard because that's exactly what I was going to say. I really think that if I could tell myself 5 years ago to just chill out just a little bit, sometimes it's okay to not reply to an email in 15 minutes. Sometimes it's okay if there's a research opportunity that you don't take. And, it's okay to like enjoy the other things in your life that are important, like your family, your loved ones, your friends, going and getting a drink of bubble tea, something I'm very much missing right now.
Oh, I love bubble tea.
So I think I couldn't say it any better. I think what Zineb said is just so important. I mean, I think both of us, because we talked about this when we stepped away from our organizations, then had the opportunity to really like slow down and appreciate the amazing motivation of the new young leaders who are coming in, but to recognize that like it's okay to take, even a year to just sit back, focus on things that are different for you. I got to focus a little bit more on my interest in medical education and global health, and also got to go get married and focus on moving into a new apartment and just enjoy like talking on the phone to friends. So I think that's what I would say.
And recording a podcast, right?
Yeah.
So all kinds of fun things, but you guys are both nailed it. I mean, as we mentioned earlier, it's very easy to want to be the yes man or yes woman and say and get into all these things, but sometimes you also do need to remember yourself. Know that you can still make a difference even if you respond after a day instead of 15 minutes, and you can definitely still make a difference in global surgery. And we're just so thankful for you guys to come and talk to us about that and show us that anyone can be a force for good in this sphere, and it doesn't matter what training level you are or whether you're from a high income country or a low income country, that we all have something to give to this sphere. So we'd just like to wrap up all of our podcasts with our final 5 questions, which we have dedicated to the 5 billion people around the world who lack access to safe and affordable surgical care. The first question that we'd like to ask you both is, what is the most recent book that you read, or maybe a TV show that you've been watching?
I just finished Becoming by Michelle Obama. It's really a nice book. It took me a very long time to finish it, but I'm glad I did.
And that's okay. You still did it, right?
I've got to say, I'm so impressed because I was just telling them before we started recording that it's been a little while since I've picked up a book. So I'll share a TV show. I recently watched Kim's Convenience on Netflix. It's a show about an immigrant family from Korea in Toronto, and I feel like I was able to resonate with that because I come from an immigrant family as well. My parents are from Iran. I really enjoyed watching that show.
Yeah, we've got some good recommendations from both of you there. That book sounds great also. Second question is, what's something not many people know about you guys, or a unique talent?
I guess something that people don't know about me is I lived in South Korea for 2 years and actually became a black belt in Taekwondo while I was there.
Oh my gosh, I'm never picking a fight with you ever again.
I was on the younger side, so who knows how much has translated into my current situation.
The ninja, I love it.
That's amazing. I didn't know that about you. So I guess what I can share is that I like to write poetry from time to time in French.
Are you going to translate it to English for us, please?
I tried, but it doesn't. I don't think you can translate poetry.
Yeah, it's very hard.
It doesn't translate, yeah.
I would love to read it if I spoke French.
Maybe you have an incentive there.
Yeah, that's true. Our next question is, what was your favorite toy growing up and why?
Different stages. When I was very, very young, my first memories were, of course, playing with dolls. And what I liked to do is to line them up against the wall and be the teacher, and they would be the students. But then when I grew up more, I loved my Game Boy. You know, the first Game Boy that didn't have colors? I just loved it.
This is a hard one. I think honestly, my favorite thing to do when I was younger was riding my bike. So I don't know if a bike counts as a toy, but that was kind of one of my favorite things. It was kind of like a little bit of freedom. I'm allowed to go around the block without my parents. It was really fun.
Definitely counts.
Would you guys be able to tell us briefly about an important mentor you've had in your life and why they've influenced you?
This is a difficult question for me. I don't think I had a mentor, but what I had were lots of helpful peers, people who are the same generation as me, who would give me a valuable piece of advice and I would give them valuable piece of advice back. So kind of an equal relationship. I don't think, it might have to do with the fact that I grew up in Morocco, and it's a bit of a hierarchical society where, mentorship relationships are not really a thing.
I think for me, my most important mentor is probably Dr. Robert Riviello, who maybe some of you know. And I think because he always led by example, he's a very kind, warm, truly caring person who actually, very interestingly enough, Zineb brought up hierarchical nature, was probably one of the only surgeons I met who really almost eliminated that feeling of hierarchy whenever I needed advice or help from someone. And he has truly impacted the field of global surgery without trying to make a name for himself, but kind of because he's such a wonderful and humble human being, his name is actually very widely known now. And I find that to be so special because it's really hard to meet that many individuals who approach life in that way. And I think it's just very inspiring, and it helps remind me what's most important in life. And he's the type of person that you can go to not only for help with global surgery or surgery related things, but also life related things. He understands the importance of human beings as a whole. And so I think that's been very special.
Great that you've had that.
I definitely agree. He's an amazing guy, and he definitely, as you said, eliminates those barriers and makes you feel like you're one of them. And Zineb, I think you bring up a really important point that often I think sometimes we think that in order to be a mentor, you kind of have to be pretty far along in your career. But you're saying that you are a mentor and you have had a lot of mentors who are at the same stage as you, right? Who are also trainees, and trainees can be mentors to either peers and or even people below us, because sometimes we think we're still a trainee, but there's medical students or pre-meds or in college who want to kind of be where we are, right? So there's always someone that can be a mentor, and think that we can't mentor people or that our advice doesn't matter until we're further along the line.
That's a really nice way to look at things, that you don't have to be, at mid-career, at the end of your career, to be a mentor.
Yeah, and I think that leads us really well into our last question of, as you said, you've given a lot of advice and got a lot of advice from your mentors who may be your peers or maybe someone like Dr. Riviello, but what would you say is the best piece of advice you've ever received?
Well, I think you value advice that you cannot think about yourself, or that's very different from your personality or things like that. And I think the advice that I received recently from a friend: stop trying to do things to the perfect. Just do them good enough, and that would be just as valuable. And it's something that I'm experiencing now, trying this kind of philosophy.
I think the best piece of advice that I've received, in some ways very similar to what Zineb mentioned. Definitely that is a great piece of advice that I try to work on. But someone told me once, they said, make sure to define your own success and to not let other people define it for you. And I think it was really getting at this idea of, don't let external validation be what you're constantly working for. Really focus on what matters most to you and let that measure your success. Whether that means having a family means being successful, being able to call your parents once a week means being successful, whether it means watching your child ride a bike for the first time is being successful, or if it's publishing 50 papers and solving all the world's problems, that's okay too. But really to be very thoughtful about what's most important in your life, and recognizing that it's okay if not everyone else sees your success as being successful.
That's a very good piece of advice.
Yeah, thank you both for that. That was excellent. And I think objectively, I think people would say that you guys have both been very successful in what you've done. So thank you so much for sharing your journeys along the way, the advice that you've gotten, and also giving advice to people listening. We've really appreciated having both of you on our show. This is the first time we've done a podcast episode with two people. It's been great hearing you guys bounce back off of each other and talk about how you've worked together in the past. So thank you so much for that.
This has been so lovely. Thank you.
Yeah, it's been a really nice moment, and thank you, Rihanna and Taylor. It's a great idea you have here. I'm looking forward to hearing all these podcasts you guys are gonna produce.
Oh yeah, for sure. Great job, guys. This is awesome.
It should be exciting. We're excited to see the different things that come out, and there's just so many amazing initiatives around the world. So hopefully we can highlight some of those things and bring attention to them. We will definitely share all the links to the different websites that you guys talked about so that people can get involved with the Facebooks, the Twitters, and the websites of each of the organizations. If you are a trainee listening to this, we please ask you to reach out. There are lots of people who are wanting to get involved or who are involved, who are happy to mentor and to lead you along the way, and we would love to have you among our midst. With that, we will thank our two amazing speakers. Thank you for all of your help, and we will see you guys next time.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Global Scalpels. If you're interested in learning more about this topic or the speaker, visit us on the web at globalscalpels.com or any of our social media platforms. Please subscribe to our podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play, YouTube, and Stitcher to hear more great content on a wide range of topics within global surgery.
If you or someone you know is doing something in global surgery you feel should be highlighted in Global Scalpels, we would love to hear from you. Thank you again for joining us today and hope to see you on our next episode.